and welcome to another ARM Software Developer Breakdown. My name is Robert Wolf, and in this video, you guessed it, we will once again be meeting with Valentin, Product Manager from Canonical, to continue building out his Innovation Lab demo. If you missed any of the previous parts to this series, cruise on down to the description and find the part you were on. All right, Valentin, what have you got for us this time?
So today we'll be covering the configuration of LXD. LXD is Canonical solution for virtualization and containers orchestration. So LXD is very lightweight. It's perfect for microcloud because it's scalable, it's production ready, and it's very easy and intuitive to use. You're going to see that in the quick configuration video. So now we are on my desktop on the Raspberry Pi 400, and we're going to configure the LXD layer on every Raspberry Pi. Let's start with the first one. So let's go SSH into it. So there, just a quick check on the storage layer. I'm using Ceph. You can see that it's all up and working. And now we're going to dive into the LXD configuration. So it starts with LXD init. And there, the first question is if we want to use clustering. Yes, because we have 4 Raspberry Pi and we want to cluster them together. We're going to keep the host name. We're going to keep the IP address. I'm going to make that bigger. And I'm not joining an existing cluster. I'm just configuring it for the first time. I want to set up password authentication. You have the choice between password or certificate. We're going to use password, which is fairly easier. We don't want to use a local storage because I do have a remote storage, which is my Ceph storage layer. You could choose a local storage. That's not very important here. Then I'm going to just keep the default choice, not want to connect to a mass server. I do want to use an existing bridge. I'm going to use my Ethernet configuration just to use the networking of my home networking. And then I'm going to keep the defaults. So that's a very simple configuration for LXD. We don't want to dive deep into LXD, just do the minimal configuration. And then we're going to group all the nodes together. So that's the next part. I'm going to SSH into one of the other nodes. So let's say the number 2. And there I'm going to repeat. I'm going to repeat the LXD init. Yes, I want to use clustering, keep the host name, keep the IP address. And this time I will be joining an existing cluster. The first node has this IP address. I'm going to use it. I'm going to accept the fingerprint and put the password that we've configured before. Then we acknowledge that all data is going to be loose when you join an existing cluster. Wait a bit. So now we have clustered together 2 nodes. We can check that with LXC cluster list. And this shows that we have 2 Raspberry Pis clustered together. We only have 1 database because 2 is not enough to have high availability. But we're going to add a 3rd node now, and we're going to have this high availability. So again, it's the same. It's the LXD init. This is getting a bit repetitive. We could just automate this. But for the demo, we are going to go through every step together. Up and be joining, repeating the password. And that's it. So now I've got 3 nodes clustered together. We can see that with the LXC cluster list again. This time you see that we have 3 Raspberry Pis clustered together. We have 3 databases because we have this high availability setup that allows us to safely lose one of the nodes. But we're not going to stop here. We're going to add a 4th node to the cluster. For the 4th and last node of the cluster, it's going to be the same, LXD init. Yes, we want clustering. We want to keep the default. We want to join an existing cluster. Again, the IP address, the main node, and acknowledging. Finally, let's use this LXC cluster list to see what we've got into the cluster. And you see that we have 4 Raspberry Pis this time clustered together. We only have 3 of them with the database for the high availability setup. I said the main node was the first one. That's not true. There is no main node. They are the 3 of them are the main nodes with the database. One of them is the leader. We don't care about it. It's a distributed installation that is fully high available. So now we do have a layer of virtualization that we're going to configure from the Raspberry Pi 400 just to be able to access the cluster remotely. So this is going to be done through the LXC remote add, and I'm going to use the name of the Raspberry Pi, the host name of the Raspberry Pi, and I'm going to name the cluster, lack of a better word. Here's a fingerprint. I need the password, of course, to be joining the cluster, and that's it. We can check. I'm on the Raspberry Pi 400. I'm going to open a new terminal. and show you that LXC command is still working from my. Interesting. I forgot to actually switch remote, so we need to do LXC remote switch and use the name we used before, and that's it. We can verify what we've got into the cluster, and that's it. So I'm on the Raspberry Pi 400, and I've joined the cluster remotely. I can now see the 4 Raspberry Pis clustered together, and I can operate on them through the LXC command line.
All right, Valentin, that was thorough, and I hope you all at home were able to follow along. So now that he's set the foundation for this demo, I think it's time to showcase some remote deployment from your Pi 400 on a VM running on the LXD cluster with VS Code. So in the next video, that's what we're going to be looking at. As a reminder, don't forget to like this video, follow our channel, ARM Software Developers, and stay tuned because in the next part of this series, we're digging into some code.